Andrew and Paula Keen's love story began like many others in Pinewood. At the annual Harvest Festival 15 years earlier, Andrew, then a shy graduate student, had volunteered to run the physics demonstration booth. Paula, home from college for the weekend, found herself captivated by his passionate explanation of physics. Their courtship was a whirlwind of outdoor adventures and cozy evenings, discussing their dreams for the future. Paula was drawn to Andrew's quiet intensity and brilliant mind, while Andrew was in awe of Paula's confidence and zest for life. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony by Pinewood Lake, their vows echoing off the surrounding mountains as friends and family cheered. The early years of their marriage were filled with the joy of building a life together. They bought a charming craftsman-style home on Maple Street. Its wrap-around porch soon cluttered with Paula's collection of potted herbs and Andrew's telescope. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or hosting game nights with their growing circle of friends. To the outside world, the Keens appeared to be the perfect couple, supportive, affectionate, and deeply in sync. But as time passed, small fissures began to appear in their relationship. Paula's career and marketing took off, bringing with it late nights at the office and frequent business trips. Andrew, content with his position as a high school teacher, struggled to understand his wife's drive for professional success. He began to feel left behind, his world shrinking as Paula's expanded. Their conversations, once flowing freely, became stilted and superficial. Paula found herself frustrated by Andrew's reluctance to try new experiences or socialize outside their established routines. Andrew, in turn, felt increasingly inadequate in the face of Paula's vibrant social life and career achievements. Attempts to rekindle their connection often fell flat. A romantic getaway to the Oregon coast ended in tense silence as they realized how little they now had in common. Date nights became an exercise in checking boxes rather than genuinely connecting. Even their physical intimacy waned, with both making excuses to avoid the awkwardness of forced passion. It was in this fragile state that Paula Keen first crossed paths with David Reeves, setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter the delicate equilibrium of their marriage and lead to consequences neither could have imagined. The seeds of Paula and David's affair were planted on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Pinewood Business Association mixer. Paula, representing her marketing firm, found herself drawn to the charismatic newcomer who spoke passionately about revitalizing the town's visual branding. David's enthusiasm was infectious, and Paula soon realized an hour had passed in what felt like minutes. Over the following weeks, their paths continued to cross professionally. Paula's firm hired David for a series of projects, necessitating frequent meetings and collaboration. What began as a working relationship quickly evolved into a friendship, with shared lunches extending well beyond the allotted hour. As they discovered a mutual love for contemporary art and obscure indie films, Paula found herself looking forward to their interactions, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. David's attentiveness and genuine interest in her thoughts made her feel seen in a way she had long forgotten. For his part, David was captivated by Paula's quick wit and the passion that shone through when she spoke about her work. The line between professional and personal blurred one evening after a particularly successful presentation to a client. Flush with victory, Paula and David decided to celebrate with drinks at a bar on the outskirts of town. As the night wore on and inhibitions lowered, their conversation turned more intimate. David's hand brushed against Paula's, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. It was Paula who made the first move, leaning in to kiss David as they stood in the parking lot. The kiss, fueled by alcohol and long-suppressed desire, quickly deepened. Their first clandestine rendezvous took place at a small bed and breakfast in the next town over, as they fell into each other's arms. All thoughts of consequences faded away. In the afterglow, tangled in rumpled sheets, Paula and David convinced themselves that what they had found was too precious to give up. And so began a careful dance of stolen moments and secret meetings. Each rendezvous adding another layer to the web of deceit that would ultimately ensnare them all. For months, Andrew Keene remained blissfully unaware of his wife's infidelity. He attributed Paula's improved mood and renewed energy to a positive shift in her work life. However, as winter gave way to spring, small inconsistencies began to nod at the edges of his consciousness. It started with little things. Paula's sudden interest in obscure bands she'd never mentioned before, hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered the room, and an inexplicable nervousness whenever plans changed unexpectedly. Andrew initially dismissed these observations, not wanting to acknowledge the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. The pivotal moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Paula had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and as Andrew reached past it to grab a mug, a notification flashed across the screen. The message preview from an unsaved number read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Last time was Andrew's hand froze mid-air. He knew he shouldn't look, that doing so would violate Paula's privacy. But the seed of suspicion once planted grew rapidly. With trembling fingers, he opened the message thread. What he found confirmed his worst fears: months of intimate exchanges, thinly veiled references to secret meetings, and declarations of passion scrolled before his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when he saw a photo David had sent, nauseated and shaking. Andrew closed the laptop and retreated to the basement, his mind reeling. When Paula returned home that evening, she found him sitting in the dark, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its rawness. Paula, caught off guard, initially tried to deny everything, but faced with the evidence Andrew had discovered, she finally broke down and confessed to the affair. As Paula sobbed and attempted to explain, Andrew listened in stony silence. When she finished, he stood up and walked out of the room without a word, leaving Paula alone with the wreckage of their marriage strewn around her. In the days following his devastating discovery, Andrew Keene surprised everyone with his apparent calm acceptance of the situation. When Paula, racked with guilt, offered to move out, Andrew insisted she stay. He spoke of forgiveness, of working through their issues together, and of his enduring love for her despite her transgression. Paula, overwhelmed with relief at this unexpected reprieve, threw herself into rebuilding their relationship. She ended things with David in a terse phone call, blocking his number and social media accounts. She suggested couples therapy, date nights, and even a second honeymoon to rekindle their connection to their friends and colleagues. The Keenes presented a united front. They were seen holding hands at the farmers' market, laughing together at local events. And Andrew even surprised Paula with flowers at her office. Many in Pinewood commented on how the couple seemed stronger than ever, admiring their ability to weather such a storm. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a very different reality was unfolding. Andrew's forgiveness was a masterful performance, concealing a heart twisted by betrayal and a mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. Each gentle word and loving gesture was calculated, designed to lull Paula into a false sense of security while he grappled with his growing obsession. Late at night, while Paula slept, Andrew would lie awake, his mind replaying imagined scenes of his wife and David's arms. He began keeping a journal, filling pages with dark musings and elaborate fantasies of confronting his wife's lover. The act of writing these thoughts became a pressure valve, allowing him to maintain his cool exterior while his inner turmoil intensified. Paula, eager to believe in their reconciliation, overlooked the subtle signs of Andrew's internal struggle. As weeks turned into months, the charade became second nature to Andrew. He played the role of the forgiving husband with chilling precision, all while his resentment festered and grew. He began to view his performance as a cosmic joke, taking a perverse pleasure in how easily everyone, especially Paula, bought into the illusion. As summer faded into autumn, Andrew Keene's carefully maintained facade began to crack under the weight of his growing obsession. At school, Andrew found himself unable to focus on his lessons, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Paula and David. Together, he snapped at students for minor infractions, his usual patience evaporating like morning dew. Colleagues noticed the change, whispering concerns about his erratic behavior in the teacher's lounge. As his jealousy deepened, Andrew's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed a hidden GPS tracker on Paula's car, justifying the invasion of privacy as necessary to ease his fears. Late at night, he would pore over her location data, constructing elaborate scenarios to explain any deviation from her usual routes. Andrew's once diverse interests narrowed to a singular focus, monitoring Paula and by extension David. He created fake social media accounts to follow David online, scrutinizing every post and interaction for any hint of continued contact with Paula. Hours were spent driving past David's apartment and office, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything to confirm his suspicions. The turning point came on an October evening. Andrew, having convinced himself that Paula was meeting David after work, followed her to a small art gallery downtown. As he watched from across the street, he saw Paula emerge from the gallery, laughing and chatting with a group of colleagues. There was no sign of David. In that moment, something inside Andrew snapped, through realization that his suspicions were unfounded. Did nothing to quell the rage and humiliation that had been building for months. Sitting in his car watching Paula drive away, Andrew made a decision. If reality wouldn't conform to his suspicions, he would force it to do so. He would create a situation that would justify his jealousy, his anger, and ultimately, the retribution he now craved. The location was his first major decision. Andrew knew the crime scene needed to be isolated enough to avoid witnesses, but not so remote as to arouse suspicion. After careful consideration, he settled on an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated building, slated for demolition in the coming year, offered both privacy and multiple access points. Next came the question of method. Andrew wanted something that would be difficult to trace back to him, ruling out firearms or any weapon he would need to purchase. After much deliberation, he decided on a grout, silent, effective, and easily made from household materials. Piece by piece, Andrew accumulated the necessary supplies. He bought lengths of wire from different hardware stores across the county, paying cash each time. Gloves, bleach, and other cleaning supplies were added to regular shopping trips, and small quantities to avoid arousing suspicion. He crafted a fake email account under the guise of a local arts organization. He composed a message to David, inviting him to participate in a secretive art installation project at the mill. The email emphasized the need for discretion, explaining that the project was meant to be a surprise for the community. Andrew knew that David's ego and artistic ambitions would make such an offer irresistible. As he waited for David to take the bait, Andrew fine-tuned the details of his plan. He meticulously cleaned his car, removing any traces of hair or fibers that could later implicate him. He purchased a burner phone with cash from a convenience store 2 towns over, using it to communicate with David under the guise of the arts organization coordinator. The night before the planned meeting, Andrew made a final visit to the lumber mill. He cleared a path through the debris, ensuring he would have a clean line of sight from his hiding spot to the entrance. With gloved hands, he positioned the garbled wire behind a stack of rotting pallets, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. As he stood in the musty darkness of the mill, the reality of what he was about to do finally hit Andrew with grim determination. Andrew left the mill and drove home, knowing that the next time he returned it would be to commit murder. Andrew Keene went through the motions of his morning routine, kissing Paula goodbye with a casualness that belied the turmoil roiling within him. He taught his classes on autopilot, his mind fixated on the events to come. As the final bell rang, Andrew hurried to his car, his heart pounding. He drove to the lumber mill, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Parking a quarter-mile away, he donned a pair of nondescript boots he'd purchased for the occasion and made his way to the mill on foot, inside the dilapidated structure. Andrew positioned himself behind the stack of pallets, the garbled wire coiled in his gloved hands. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each sound from outside sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the crunch of tires on gravel announced David's arrival. Andrew held his breath as footsteps approached, echoing in the cavernous space. David's voice called out tentatively. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Andrew remained perfectly still, watching as David moved further into the mill. When David's back was turned, Andrew emerged from his hiding spot, wire at the ready. In 3 quick strides, he was behind David. Before David could fully register the presence behind him, Andrew looped the wire around his throat and pulled tight. David's hands flew up, clawing desperately at the wire cutting into his neck. He thrashed violently, his elbow catching Andrew in the ribs with surprising force. The struggle seemed to last in eternity. Andrew's arms burned with the effort of maintaining his grip as David fought for his life. Gradually, David's movements became weaker, his gasps for air more sporadic. With one final convulsive shudder, David Reeves went limp in Andrew's arms. Andrew held on for several minutes more, ensuring that no life remained in his rival's body. When he finally released his grip, David crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings, panting heavily. Andrew stared down at the lifeless form before him. The reality of what he had done crashed over him in waves. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the stark finale of taking a human life. Moving as if in a trance, Andrew began the process of cleaning up the scene. He collected stray fibers from David's clothing, pocketing them to dispose of later. Using bleach he had stashed earlier, he meticulously cleaned any surfaces he or David might have touched. As the light outside began to fade, Andrew dragged David's body to a pre-dug hole in the far corner of the mill. He covered the shallow grave with debris, knowing that the impending demolition would further conceal his crime. Before leaving, Andrew took one last look around the mill with a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. Andrew realized that he had done it. He had committed the perfect murder. Driving home, Andrew found Paula already there preparing dinner. He forced himself to act normally, commenting on the meal and asking about her day with casualness. Over the next few days, Andrew was hyper-aware of every news report and passing police car. He scoured local news websites for any mention of David's disappearance, but found nothing. The lack of immediate alarm was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Paula, oblivious to the turmoil beneath her husband's calm exterior, commented on how much more relaxed Andrew seemed lately. She attributed it to their efforts at reconciliation, never suspecting the dark truth behind his changed demeanor. A week after the murder, the first signs of concern about David's whereabouts began to surface. His clients reported missed deadlines and unanswered calls. Friends posted on social media, asking if anyone had heard from him. Andrew watched these developments with a mixture of dread and perverse fascination. When the police finally became involved, Andrew was ready. He had prepared a detailed account of his movements on the day of David's disappearance, complete with fabricated receipts and a meticulously edited digital trail. He even mentioned to Paula in the air shot of a neighbor that he hoped that nice graphic designer was okay, establishing an alibi of concern. As the investigation gained momentum, Andrew found himself drawn into the search efforts. He volunteered to help distribute flyers and even organized a search party to comb areas of Pinewood Park. His apparent dedication to finding David threw off any suspicion that might have fallen on him. But beneath his helpful exterior, Andrew was constantly on edge. Every unexpected knock at the door sent his heart racing. He began to have vivid nightmares of David's final moments. Waking up drenched in sweat. The weight of his actions pressed down on him. A constant, invisible burden that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. As days turned into weeks, with no sign of David Reeves, the Pinewood Police Department intensified its investigation. Detective Laura Stewart, a recent transfer from Portland with a reputation for solving cold cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. Stewart's first step was to retrace David's last known movements. Interviews with his clients and friends painted a picture of a man who had been excited about an upcoming art project, though details were frustratingly vague. Stewart's interest was piqued by mentions of a secretive installation at an undisclosed location. The detective's scrutiny soon turned to David's personal life. It didn't take long for rumors of his affair with Paula Keene to surface. Stewart approached the subject delicately in her interview with Paula, who admitted to the past indiscretion but insisted it had ended months ago. Andrew, present for the interview, played the part of the supportive husband perfectly, expressing sympathy for David's disappearance. Despite the history, as Stewart dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. David's bank records showed no unusual activity, and his passport remained in his apartment. His car was found parked at his residence, ruling out the possibility that he had simply left town. The more Stewart investigated, the more convinced she became that David had met with foul play. A breakthrough came when a hiker reported finding David's phone in Pinewood Park, miles from his usual haunts. Forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been wiped clean of data, an act that struck Stewart as deliberate and suspicious. With each new piece of evidence, the circle of suspects narrowed. Stewart found herself returning again and again to the Keenes. Paula's affair provided a motive, but her genuine distress seemed authentic. Andrew's alibi was solid, yet something about his two perfect responses nagged at Stewart's instincts. As autumn deepened into winter, the case consumed Detective Stewart. She spent long nights poring over evidence, convinced that the key to unraveling the mystery lay somewhere in the complex web of relationships surrounding David Reeves. Little did she know the truth was far closer and far more chilling than she could have imagined. The turning point in the investigation came on a frigid December morning, 3 months after David Reeves' disappearance. A team of surveyors, assessing the old lumber mill for demolition, made a grisly discovery. Partially unearthed by recent heavy rains, David's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave. Detective Stewart and her team descended on the scene, meticulously combing the area for evidence. Despite Andrew's careful cleanup, trace evidence remained. Fibers matched to David's clothing were found embedded in the floorboards, and DNA analysis of the soil revealed blood spatter consistent with a violent struggle. The discovery of the body shifted the investigation into high gear. Stewart re-interviewed everyone connected to David, this time with a sharper focus. It was during her second conversation with Andrew Keene that things began to unravel. Stewart noticed subtle inconsistencies in Andrew's story. Minor details that didn't quite align with his previous statements. His demeanor, once calmly cooperative, now had an undercurrent of nervousness. When Stewart casually mentioned that they had surveillance footage from near the lumber mill, she saw a flicker of panic cross Andrew's face before he quickly composed himself. That momentary lapse was all Stewart needed. She intensified her questioning, probing deeper into Andrew's alibi for the day of David's disappearance. Under the relentless pressure, Andrew's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a dramatic turn, Andrew broke down and confessed to the murder. He recounted the entire sordid tale. His discovery of the affair, his months of secret planning, and the final fatal confrontation at the lumber mill. As he spoke, it was as if a dam had burst. Years of pent-up emotion pouring out in a torrent of words, Paula brought in for questioning separately was shattered by the revelation. She struggled to reconcile the loving, forgiving husband she thought she knew with the man capable of such a calculated act of violence. Her world, already fragile from the strain of the affair in its aftermath, collapsed entirely. As news of Andrew's confession spread, the town of Pinewood reeled in shock. The image of the Keens as the perfect couple, even in the face of adversity, was shattered. Friends and colleagues struggled to understand how they could have missed the signs of Andrew's deteriorating mental state. In the following weeks, more details emerged. His internet search history revealed months of research on undetectable poisons and body disposal methods. The depth of his obsession and the meticulous nature of his planning chilled even the most seasoned detectives. Andrew Keen was charged with first-degree murder. As he awaited trial, psychologists debated whether his actions were the result of temporary insanity or a more deep-seated pathology. Paula, grappling with her own guilt and the traumatic loss of both her lover and her husband, retreated from public life. The case of David Reeves' murder would long be remembered in Pinewood as a tragic reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. It served as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and the unforeseen consequences of betrayal, forever changing the way the town viewed itself and its inhabitants.